So I'm Sam Harvey from the Center for Career and Professional Development. And on Coffee and Conversations this week, we're going to talk about understanding salary. So our office gets asked pretty regularly about salaries. And a big thing I want to just put out there is that the number is going to vary very wildly depending on different factors, and that's what today is going to be a lot more about, is how do you personally determine where you fit into these factors to get that correct amount of money that you're looking for. So it is important, though, to go into your interviews with some sort of number in mind so that you can know if the offer that you're being given is going to be fair. And then if they ask for your requirements, that you'll have a general number in mind that will be helpful for you to be able to give to them at that time, and you won't be like, oh no, I went too low, or maybe if you go way high and they're like, oh, we really can't afford this person then. So it'll be good for you to kind of have some numbers in mind while you go. So the first sort of stuff to consider is going to be coming up with that number. So the important factors for that, the first one is going to be calculating your cost of living. So thinking of cost of livings as things you're going to need to pay every month in order to survive in a moderately comfortable way. So this means pricing out approximate rent, what your cost of food might be, and with food I would sort of lean onto that by the end of like buying and preparing foods over necessarily eating meals out. Eating meals out is often considered a luxury, so while you're doing that pricing out, kind of figuring out that way. And then also, do you have to pay any loans? What's your transportation cost? So really keeping in mind the things that are just going to allow you to continue to get to work every single day and to continue to live a healthy existence minus any other things that might end up coming up. So cost of living is going to vary for someone based off, one, what they're just used to. Someone whose family, comes from a family where of millionaires is going to have a much different idea of what a cost of living is going to be than someone who comes from a family only making maybe $50,000 a year or something like that. So it's always going to vary. So it's always important to kind of price things out from what you're used to, but kind of knowing if you're used to things being on the higher end of things, potentially going a little lower. If you're used to things being really low and like living off ramen noodles, potentially going a little bit higher to making sure you're able to get like fruits and veggies added into that. Is just my personal feelings on what you could add into this. Along with that, it's important to be realistic, such as if you're living in New York City, it's very likely that you should price out your cost of living, at least as an entry-level professional, that you're going to probably end up needing a roommate because very few entry-level positions are going to pay enough for you to live alone. But that might not be the case in another city. So living in New York City, for example, costs more than living in Boulder, Colorado. So about $5,000 in Boulder, Colorado is equal to about $8,000 in New York City. So I guess like what you can get for that amount of money. But because of stuff like this, a salary in New York City tends to be higher because the cost of living is higher. So that's also important as you're moving to other places, is one, calculating your cost of living based off of that place, but also knowing that if you do a calculation of your cost of living for New York City and then try to go to Boulder, it's not going to line up in the same way, and you might feel you're not being offered enough money when in fact you definitely are being offered enough. So take into account where you're interested in living when you start to figure out your cost of living, but also it's always good to consider where, if you're willing to live somewhere else. I know a lot of our students here often like to stay in New York City. This is where your hub of stuff is, but it might also be worthwhile to consider other cities, other places, and coming back to New York at some point, but because of that early cost of living changeover of expensive. The other things you're going to want to consider are things outside of your basic needs. So this doesn't mean budgeting out for something like I want to go to 2 out-of-country vacations every year, something that's a little bit more extravagant, but it can mean things like if you're interested in trying to go out with your friends a couple times a month, or if you want to get a pet. So starting about those things that don't necessarily help you to just live every single day, but to go beyond that, those comforts that help to bring joy to somebody's life that are important for maintaining your mentality and all of that. Along with that, I also would encourage you to consider savings. So this is really looking at what you would have left after covering your monthly expenses and considering those sort of fun things you want to have. But it's also important to consider your future and to put some money away for that. So this is money that can be helpful in case of medical emergencies, if you have to move, if you end up getting a pet, there might be an unexpected vet bill that you have to pay. And I say that from my personal experiences of unexpected vet bills. Even if you're only thinking that you can put away $10 a month, I would consider adding that to that sort of budget of money of what you need to be making every single month for your ideal state of living. So you'll want all of these numbers, and that's going to get you a sort of a ballpark figure of what living your life might cost you. You'll want a salary that can cover your basic needs, but as I said, it's good to aim to have that buffer, having fun, and to save up a little each month. So start with the cost of living, know that number, keep that really far in mind, and anything beyond that is kind of nice extra things. You might actually have two numbers. One is your so it'll give you a range more or less. This is my cost of living, this is what I need to make in order to make rent, to live, to be a healthy human being, minus any other extenuating circumstances. And then you'll have your number of but also I would love to do these types of things, and this would be a great thing to be able to make if I had maybe not unlimited money, but if I could have $100 in fun spending money, if I could have $200 in spending money, kind of starting to think about how you want that to look. So this is going to be a range that you decide for yourself. You're not necessarily going to be giving this range to other people. It might be a pretty large range in the end, and that's a good thing to have because, as we'll talk about next, companies are going to vary wildly based off what they can offer you. So the other factors you're going to want to consider is that now that you have this number, at some point you're going to actually have to talk to the company about what they're interested in paying you. Well, hopefully you'll have to talk to the company about what they're interested in paying you. So the size of the company can be an important factor in how much they're able to pay you. So a startup with only a couple of employees probably doesn't have as much money as a larger company. And because a large company has the capacity to bring in more revenue, they tend to pay higher in general. And this is going to be general stuff. There's, of course, going to be the company that falls outside of this. There's going to be a lot of companies that fall outside of this. After company size, your job title will also be another determining factor, especially based on the size of the company. So being someone that's a lead designer at a small company probably won't pay as much as at a larger company because you're likely supervising less people. And you're usually working probably once more on less projects overall, balancing a little bit less. You might also see, though, that you have the same title as somebody that's in the same company as you, but in a different department or in a different company, and you make different amounts, and that might be based off the company's priorities. So if you're in the sort of sales place, there might be a director in a sales position versus a design director. The salesperson might end up making more money because the priority of the company is to sell. So they're putting more money towards their salespeople than they might not be on their design side of things. As far as that, from company to company, that once more determines size, also the other factors in a company. So the company might be bigger, the company might have had a really good couple of years. The person themselves might be coming in with more or less experience than you are, and those are all those determining factors in what you can ask for. So your duties along with that can help determine what you're making. So a job that's a little bit more on a support-based side is going to make less than someone whose job is seen as integral to the company's mission. So that's often why people feel as though interns can be lower paid or unpaid because that person supporting the company can run without them. So the less integral to the core of the company that the job is seen as, often less money will be given towards the salary of that job. So then the next one, private versus public. So a private company often has a capacity to pay more, but depending on the city you're working for, a government job can actually also pay rather well and can often offer some job stability and benefits that you might not get at a private company. So someone working at CUNY, for example, this universities in the city, will probably make more than people in similar positions in other higher education institutes in New York City. And finally, the last thing to consider is that the company might be considering other benefits while they determine your salary. So a place with a lot more vacation, with a really awesome 401k matching system, with a medical matching, or paying most or 90% or 100% of medical expenses, are going to continue that, and the salary itself might end up being lower. But overall, a place with a higher salary might also expect you to work more hours. They might be expecting you to do more nights and weekends than a place that isn't paying as much. But that's things that you can kind of determine throughout the interview process. As I said, none of this is a hard and fast rule for any of this, but they're important things to kind of keep in mind when you're starting to choose companies and you're trying to adjust that range that you've already come up with in order to talk to the company about how much that you can say. As I didn't mention this before, but another important thing to keep in mind is that sort of years of experience that you have. So I'm thinking a little bit more right now towards entry-level positions. You're coming in with less experience, so lower salaries that way. The more experiences that you get under your belt, usually the more you can ask for going forward. So that lower end of your range will probably be towards where you go then, but that number will continue to increase. But you might also end up with your higher range. Salaries are interesting, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about where you can look for some more concrete numbers in a little bit. So when it comes to actually talking to the company about the salary, the first question is, so when do you actually find out, or when should you be finding out about this? So you want to wait till you're at least close to the end of the interview process before you really bring up money or benefits, but you also don't need to wait until they give you an offer. If possible, the rule is to try to get them to say a number first, but they've been told the same rule, so it can often become a game of chicken. And my personal belief is never bringing it up is going to be more of, it benefits the employer more than it's going to benefit you in the end. You might end up staying in an interview process or turning it down another job because you were waiting to hear about this one, and then you find out this one pays you way less than you needed to make. So I always say it's worth bringing it up. So if possible, so throughout the interview process, it's important to be asking along the way what the next steps are so that you know what's coming next and how many more interviews are potentially left. If it's a phone interview, there's probably one more left, but it's always good to ask. So then when you're told that the next step is that they're going to be making decisions, if at that point you still haven't really heard anything about salaries or benefits, that's an okay time to ask them. If the person you're talking to at that time doesn't necessarily know, sometimes the people in the individual departments don't necessarily know, they can hopefully tell you who would know that answer and pass you on. And if it was someone you already talked to, like, oh, it was that HR person that you talked to when you came in the door, they'll be able to tell you and you don't get the chance to see them before you leave. It's okay to ask about it in a follow-up email. You should be sending the follow-up email anyway, so in that you can just be like, oh, it was really great hearing about this, this, and this, your usual stuff. I did think, because we're at this point in the process, I didn't get the chance to ask about what the salary, your range you're considering for this position might be. The company itself is also very likely to give you a range that they're sort of considering, which it's really important to understand what that range is during the negotiation process. And in 2 weeks, we will be doing a webinar about negotiating. So if they ask you first, then you can also give them a range. But as I said, you're going to want to do a little bit more research about the specific company to know where in your range their range might actually get to fall. So understanding, well, what's the size of the company? Who am I reporting to? Are there people going to be under me? To start to get an idea of what that number might be best. Keep in mind that if you give them a range, they're also probably going to move towards the lower end of your range. So I usually suggest aiming for a higher range so that you have that buffer room to go lower. So if you're going in and you're like, well, I really should be making like 47, but you tell them you want 45 to 50, they'll probably lean towards that 45, 46 sort of area. But if you tell them, oh, I'd like 47 to like 50, 52, then you're more likely to end up in that 47, 48 range of what you're looking for within that. You could also tell them even higher. You say, oh, I'm thinking around like 49 to like 53 and potentially go lower. At that point, you might start to hit on the edge of them thinking that they can't actually afford you, and how to know if what you've asked is appropriate. So there's a lot of different tools out there that are designed to help people understand a little bit more about what other people are getting paid in similar positions. So Glassdoor.com, I'm just going to switch over now to my internet browser. Okay, so Glassdoor.com, it's a service that you often do need to actually create a sign up for in order to get full access to all of the information. But you can usually get at least a little bit of information before you do it. When you sign up, they're going to want you to add in salary information. I recommend it's good to do. If you don't really have a salary, you can maybe find the part-time job you're doing, some job that you're doing. It's a weird way that there's not really, I think, a way to say, I haven't had a job yet, but you can put something in. So I'm just going to look up, because I was talking to an interior designer earlier, what an interior designer salary is in Brooklyn. And you can see they're going to give you sort of the average. Let me just double check, make sure my screen's showing. Cool. So you're going to get an average base pay. So that's the base pay that doesn't take into consideration if there's any bonuses included in the system. Doesn't take into consideration the benefits. They'll tell you some related jobs to that. So you can see an interior design manager actually makes way more versus an assistant makes similar amounts. You'll see sort of a bigger range. So 43 is kind of the low end of it versus 75. But then you can start to filter from here. So what about 0 to 50 employees? Okay, that goes down a little bit. And you can see now it's telling me that I need to register to hear more. Years of experience, that's another thing you can potentially add some more information on. And then if you scroll down, it'll start to give you a little bit more by the companies that are out there, and you'll start to see how that kind of lays out across the board of things. And they're actually giving me a pretty good amount of information here. You can see some of these kind of jump up and down a little bit, so this will help you know. So if you were applying to Perkins Eastman, you would know that they can go anywhere from 45 to 69 for this position. You can see 12 people. Salaries, 24 salaries from all locations. This is a specifically New York City based one. They have 12 salaries. And the average is about 61, so you might go as an entry-level person towards the lower end of this, but you know you could probably go above the 45. You could probably go for maybe around 50 on this one. But once more, you kind of feel it out, be open to be flexible versus like at this place grade, it's a 41.7 is about where they fall. They're lower on that general range of hourly in that. So this is a really great tool. I definitely recommend if you haven't signed up for this one to sign up. In similar veins of just starting to get as many big pictures as you can, there's this website, coraflot.com, that I'm a big fan of. For this one, it's a similar system. They try and get you to sign up for it and share information, but you can do the salary information here. And similar thing, you can find a job title. You can go by metro areas that you're looking for, international cities, US cities. So I'm going to grab product designer. And if you don't see it, I'm pretty sure you can add more info in. So this kind of gives you once more the breakdown of sort of averages of what people are making. But then from here you can kind of say, well, I'm looking in the New Jersey area. That will do it a little bit more. And then this, I guess that brought us more to New Jersey. So that's more about New Jersey. Design salaries in New Jersey. Let's try 3D modeler salaries in New Jersey. So you'll start to see it'll once more give you those sort of general things. I also like this system because it can tell you a little bit more about that area. So you could potentially refine your location even deeper into that city or into that state. Work environment versus education. So kind of what the general education level that you're finding within this, so that, and pretty standardly through the design world, bachelor's degrees tend to be the most. And kind of where, so versus a corporate in-house place, mostly bachelor's, versus an academic is where the master's gets a little bit more. So if you're considering other degrees, that can be a great tool to decide, like, oh, is this really what people do in this field? And then company side versus medical benefits, so a 1 to 5. So percentage of employees of that side that reported receiving medical benefits. So you can start to see the bigger the company, the more likely you are to report receiving some sort of benefit. Medical benefits, most companies, at least depending on your state, should provide at least some sort of option. But there's very often that they might just, here's an option, but they don't necessarily pay any part of that. And we will be talking about benefits in 4 weeks, so I think we're near the end of February we'll be talking about benefits. And then the gender split, if you're interested in starting to see, I think this is a much more general part of the industries, but like you can see that industrial design is by far the most male, least female of these. Say in general, we're seeing, I think most of these are more male, but the balance is in packaging design. But this is just interesting other information that you can get from Coraflot. And in general, you'll find a lot of interesting information if you look at more different sites that can help show you the bigger picture of what this field might look like. So then the final one I wanted to just show you is LinkedIn Salary. I know I'm a big fan of LinkedIn in general, so this is a great other system that they have within here. Glassdoor is very general, Coraflot's very design centered. LinkedIn will also be more general within there. So in this, you can also do job titles. So art director and the United States. Cool. You can see that this wants me to tell me about its salary, so okay. Another one, most of these, they'll want you to report your salary. That's how they gain the information that they need to report on other people. So I'm just going to grab another thing. So something, a salesperson in Houston, Texas. So you can see that they generally make a base salary of $30,000 a year. Once more, you can start to kind of go through. If we kind of do the sneak at what's behind here. So they have the base salary with the total compensation with a range. Once more, not going to let us see numbers right now. I will have to fill this out. But also this one includes some potential additional compensation. So if you get annual bonuses, if there's commissions perhaps involved, you can kind of go by company size again, by the specific industry within there. So if it's like the consumer goods industry versus the media-based industry, and then top paying locations for sales people. So you also can find apparently the sort of area where people are making the most money in this particularly chosen field, which can be really helpful once more in that determining where to go. So then the final resource I just wanted to go over today was a cost of living calculator. I just Googled cost of living calculator. This is NerdWallet. I really liked the design of it. It's very picture-y, which is nice. So what you can do here is if you're in San Francisco, for example, but you're like, cool, well, I'm going to move to Anchorage and I currently make $50,000, it will tell you the same standard of living and how much you would need to make there to keep the same standard of living going. So this is definitely important to know even just based off of this. So we know that 65K is in New Jersey is a medium thing. So if you were to calculate out, actually, so I think I said something about like 50,000 earlier for an interior designer in New York. So if we were to say we're in New York and we're in Manhattan and you want to live in Anchorage and I currently make 50,000, this will show you that you only need 26,000 then when you decide to move to Anchorage. So that can be helpful if you're looking at companies that are mainly here and then decide on a company that's somewhere else and your cost of living doesn't necessarily align with that, to see, okay, what about does that mean? But it also will give you sort of the median 2-bedroom apartment rent for Manhattan versus median home price, once more Manhattan versus Anchorage. So it'll give you also that sort of breakdown of what that cost might potentially look like. And the one thing that's higher is the healthcare costs. But so you can kind of even decide things like, okay, well, what is my yoga class? What's the different price in that going to be? And it's not necessarily a huge price difference, but those are the things that add up over time that are good to keep track of and to know a little bit about. I'd say as far as figuring out your cost of living, doing things such as just browsing apartments on the internet for the area you're thinking of moving into, that can be good. You can also use the resources like NerdWallet that will start to show you what that differentiation might look like, because you might be like, well, I know my groceries in New York City cost me $30 a week, but what's that going to mean in San Francisco? What's that going to mean if I move up to Vermont? To be able to start to piece together what that pricing is going to look like. So really my big last things on salary is it's definitely all about doing your research ahead of time. Understand as much as you can about this company that you're working for. Definitely see if you can find anything on Glassdoor to at least give you some ballpark figures, but also know how much you need to be making, and be a little flexible within that number as well if you might end up not being able to go out as often as you want to when you first are starting a new position, but also weigh the costs and benefits of those types of things. There's a lot of other factors that go into salary, such as the benefits, and as I said, we'll talk about benefits in a couple of weeks. And next week we'll talk about the negotiation. So what do you do if you're given a number that you don't necessarily agree with, or even if you do agree with it, how do you try and get a little bit more?